So, Sarah, thank you for taking time out of your day. We are here to chat all things Generation Terror, which is screening at FrightFest as part of the 25th anniversary. How are you feeling about the screening?
Yeah, hi Kat, thanks for having me. I am really excited about the screening actually. I think this year, having done two previous documentaries about horror films, and we often do like the premieres on our own basically, and this year we've got some of the characters that we filmed interviews with for the documentary coming along to premiere, so it's going to be much cooler, hopefully much more fun and interesting for the audience with the Q&A. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Well, as you said, this isn't the first time that you've had a film at Fright Fest. How do you think that festivals like Fright Fest help independent filmmakers? What is it that screening at these events that gives you guys?
Um, Frightfest itself has a like it's very helpful with sort of the press. I find like every year that we play something that the press are really kind and like understand what Frightfest is and what a lot of the films are, and then you get some good reviews and things come out after the film, and also that often leads to other festivals hearing about the film and then taking it on further to other festivals. So festivals are so important to just getting the word out about a film when you're independent, especially. um it's just hard if you don't know where your film's going to end up, like distribution wise, so festivals are super helpful in that respect.
And you previously made the found footage phenomena and the J horror virus. Both of these are tied to the same sort of era and movement of Generation Terror. What was it about, this sort of decade of filmmaking that, intrigued you so much to, to delve into it in so many different aspects?
Yeah, it's funny. It's my decade. Like I grew up watching these films like Wrong Turn and whatnot when I was a kid. So it that's why I just, everyone likes what they like probably because they watched it when they were a kid. And um I think that also nobody really thinks about it as an era yet. And I think we wanted to I me and Phil and a lot of the contributors have always thought of it as its separate era, and that it has so many interesting facets. Like um obviously found footage kind of bloomed in the noughties, and J horror was pure naughty, like end of the 90s noughties, this same era. And they were like particularly interesting to delve into on their own. And I think we ended up deciding to round it off as like the whole generation. And I'm not sure, it's quite broad, and like can't cover everything. And maybe we would have wanted to delve deeper into things like the new French extremity, which was obviously that era as well. And we were even discussing originally like maybe we should do a documentary about purely about remakes. Then we thought that we got a lot of like negative feedback about that, so I was thinking maybe that's not what we should do. People are so attached to the originals, and I feel as well, I think it's very attached to a lot of the originals, so to make it about the remakes, maybe, even though there was a lot in the early noughties. So yeah, I mean, just fascinating how in the 90s, just how what so much changed with the internet, basically the rise of the internet. And then everything changed in the turn of the millennium. We had so many different horror films coming from everywhere.
Yeah. And how do you, when you're starting a documentary and, it's one of these where, you're going to filmmakers and critics and things, how do you kind of whittle it down to your wish list and then approach people to get them involved?
Oh, it's a bit chaotic. I mean, I think we just sort of go, oh, we should talk to the director of Wolf Creek and let's email him. And then, all sorts of people from films that we think are really important in the decade. And then some of them come back and some of them don't. So it's kind of like builds itself a bit randomly. We One thing I don't know if this is one of your questions, but we had an interview. I was so excited about this interview with Rob Schmidt, who did Wrong Turn, because I love Wrong Turn. It's one of my favorite horror films from when I was a kid. And we filmed him, but I think he's in China, so he filmed himself, and but it just like the quality wasn't good enough. We can't really get away with that now. We're not in the pandemic anymore, so shame. But yeah, it's we wanted to make sure that there was a good cross section of people from the different um like the different sections of noughties horror. So we have Xavier Gens from New French Extremity. We have um Surgeon. I'm not even going to go there. From a Serbian film. And I mean, when I try and think of it, we're all sorts of people from all like
Mm.
the 90s era, the noughties era, and so just a good sort of cross section of the era, just to talk about each other's films. I think that's what's most important, is to have them reflect on the era and other people's films as well as not just their own.
It must be fascinating when you do get to sit down with some of these people and suddenly realize that, it's not necessarily just their own film that they're prepared to talk about, that they are so informed
Mm.
on what everybody else was doing. Because I think sometimes there's a perception that, directors are only bothered about their own work, it's all me, me, me. But I think in this, you've got somebody like Joe Lynch who, is very generous with, talk. I don't even think he particularly mentions Wrong Turn 2 all that
No.
much. He's much more giving with talking about what his peers were doing at the time. So it must be quite interesting, when you go into an interview and suddenly it's like, oh well, this isn't what I was expecting you to talk about, but cool.
Well, that's the thing. You don't really know who is going to be the most insightful going in. You just have no idea. I mean, some people might do like a preliminary interview or something, but we don't really do that because you don't want to lose something in a preliminary interview. um I've heard this so many times, like someone will do a Zoom interview like to just gauge what they're getting out of the person, and then that person won't say the same things again on camera. Like, so very much you just go in there blind and then like hope for the best. So some people are really really good at reflect, like Joe Lynch and Chris Smith as well. Just they really get it, and they totally understand all of the noughties, like where it came from, why. And we were just amazed by the amount we got from Joe Lynch. I remember seeing like the interview come in and it was over 2 hours long, and I was like, what? Give me a break. But no, it was so good.
Yeah, I mean that's just Joe. I mean, I think I once had 20 minutes with him, and I think I got like two questions in. So that's just Joe. You give him an inch, and he's going to talk forever.
Yeah, yeah, he's a sweet guy. I've not met him in real life, but I would like to, because he obviously knows what he's talking about.
And was there anything that sort of came up in the conversations that maybe made you reassess that time period in film?
um I think the whole process with this one was very much learning, because it's so broad, learning if there's a through line of the noughties of where everything specifically came from. Like, we definitely learned how some things were connected that maybe we didn't know before. And for instance, I mean, I think that it's very interesting how everything in the early noughties led into torture porn era. I'm still not fully um across how the torture porn era like went so harsh by the end, with the Serbian film and Human Centipede and Grotesque from Japan, and all those Antichrist, all these films in like 2009, 2010, because that kind of killed it, I think, because it was too much and everyone was like, no, this is too far. Like, nobody's enjoying watching Serbian film, like, really. I mean, I really like it for what it is, for what they did with it, but you're not watching it for enjoyment, I think. And that's definitely what's changed from Saw. Saw is very enjoyable to watch. I think you'll go back and watch them. They're really well made films. They're like bringing in a bit of Seven and stuff from the 90s, and they've got story and it's interesting. And then yeah, so honestly, it's quite a chaotic era, so it's hard to know what we learned and what we didn't learn.
And is this it for now for horror documentaries, or do you have any other sort of genres or subgenres that you'd like to delve into, maybe outside of this time period?
I think I'd like to see this as like a trilogy for me. Obviously, Phil was not involved in the J horror one, but um, it makes sense to see it as like that, the naughty sort of trilogy of horror docs. I don't think I'll be doing any more horror docs, at least for a while. I can't think of one to do. So, and I think we've had a Phil a little bit. I think it was a weird sort of zeitgeist. I might be wrong here, but in the lockdown era when we made the found footage, and it seemed to be like the right time to make this sort of expansive horror documentary in a way that like there had been them before, but they weren't necessarily very, they didn't have the platform like Shudder to go out on, and they were quite smaller, seen as like where would they go? I don't even, maybe I don't know honestly where some of these are, but they're not on Shudder because Shudder was fairly new around that time. So it was kind of like a moment where these were able to be made and they had a platform. But I think that's possibly maybe the interest is going down a bit. I'm not sure. Honestly, if that might not be true, but
It's fair.
it's a
And
bit negative.
outside of Generation Terror, today as we record, another project that you are involved with was announced. Can you share anything about that?
Are you talking about the hammer?
Yes.
I literally just put that on Twitter, yeah. Um, I I think I can only really say what they said in the Deadline article because they want to drip feed information, but I'm allowed to say that I'm in it. But yeah, Sky and Hammer making a documentary together about the history of Hammer. It's going to be huge, really amazing contributors. Not me, I'm one of the shit ones. Um, but they've got some really amazing gets like for that you would just never think that you could put in a documentary. They're just so I'm really excited to see how that um comes out and like how they've done it because they're looking at basically the history of Hammer in a sort of more production-y kind of who was the people who were creating this brand sort of thing. So yeah, weird because I'm never in front of the camera, so that was like the most terrifying day of my whole life. But anyway, it's over now. Hopefully they've actually put me in it. It would be embarrassing.
I'm sure they have. And it's because Hammer is, it's such this big institution in British cinema. So it makes, it's quite nice to suddenly, see it, it's coming back and now it's being celebrated with this documentary. So it's great to see.
Yeah, my dad wrote a book about Hammer in the 90s, so they that's why that there's sort of this connection there. Um, he's dead, so he can't do the interview himself.
But the legacy lives on, that obviously osmosis, you've obviously, you've been brought up around that. So, you're here to sort of
Yeah.
carry on that legacy, carry on that torch. I guess, the final question, Fright Festers, pass holders are currently picking what they should be watching. Why do you hope that they take a chance on Generation Terror?
I think, documentaries aren't for everyone. Lots of people go to Fright Fest to watch crazy horror films, and that's what, so, I wouldn't want to convince people who weren't really into it to come and see it. But I think that there's a lot of people who are interested in the history of film and definitely if anyone out there actually liked the found footage doc, it's very much, I would say, like linear with that. So please, yeah, come along and see it if you can get a ticket. I think it's nearly sold out actually, which is great.
Well, I wish you best of luck with the screening.
Thank you so much. Thanks.